I'm David Bishop, author of Metagility, and this is the Agile Uprising podcast.
Greetings and welcome to another edition of the Agile Uprising podcast. I'm your host, Jay Hersko. Joining us once again, I have my partner in crime as my co-host, Mr. Mike Cadell. Mike, thanks for joining.
Hey, thanks, Jay. Howdy, y'all.
Glad to have you back, Mike. And so the topic of this week's episode is Mike and I recently finished the book, Creating Agile Organizations, a Systemic Approach. And we reached out blindly and we got one lucky and the guy answered our emails. So joining us to talk about his book is one of the co-authors, Cesario Ramos. Cesario, thank you for joining us.
Hello, thank you for having me.
We are so glad to have you. But so we'll start off, Cesario, with the easy question for our listeners that may not be aware of you or may not be aware of what you do. Can you give us a little bit of an intro, a bio as to who you are and how you ended up talking to us?
Okay. So I'm based in Europe, and I've been doing agile things since 2002 with Scrum, and I remember taking a first course by Ken Swaber back in 2003, which was life-changing actually. And I've been working with companies mostly as a consultant since then. So I wrote 3 books, co-authored 3 books, and my last one is this book that we're talking about. And yeah, I received your email, and I thought, well, let's check out the website of these 2 gentlemen, and look, you guys checked out okay. So
I'm glad we passed the background test. So and you have read written a couple of books, which we will talk about. But the one that landed, and Mike, I believe you were the one that picked this up first, which is odd because usually I'm the one who suggests books. Mike, you picked this up, didn't you? And then said to me, "Hey, Jay, you got to check this out. This is in your wheelhouse."
Yeah, I think within the first chapter, I'd seen 3 or 4 things that just really connected for me, and so I was messaging Jay on Slack, and that kind of lit the spark. Yeah, I think somebody may have liked it on LinkedIn or somewhere. I came across it in some social media realm, and like, this looks kind of interesting. And
yes, you know what? You're right. It came out of, I think it was Sam Hogarth, who posted in Discord, "Hey, have you guys read this one yet?" Because we're known to read a whole bunch of stuff. So, Cesario, I'm going to start with I guess another easy question is, why this book and why now? What led you down the path of, hey, this is some knowledge we got to put into print so other people can use it?
yeah, so I think there are 2 main reasons. One reason is maybe a strange one, but that is, well, we've been working with on these kinds of problems for so long, and a lot of times we come into a situation where we thought, oh darn, we did this before. I don't know which customer again or which situation. Oh yeah, let's go find it, and then we had to search 1,000 slides or 30 papers and so on. So one of the reasons was, why don't we just write it down and a summary of all of that, so we have a reference for ourselves also. So that was one of the reasons, one of the main reasons. And I think the other main reason, at least for me personally, was that as you can hopefully agree on with me, Agile has turned into a very, very mature market, and there's a lot of stuff, a lot of papers, lots of blogs. Anybody can and does write stuff about it, and we wanted to make a statement about, well, what's a perspective that we believe is a true, in the sense, a pure perspective on agile organizations, and let's put that voice out there. That's more a reaction to this overflow of information we get.
So, Cesario, I'm curious, as you were writing it with your co-author Ilya, what was that process like? How did you all come together, and how did the book emerge? Between the 2 of y'all.
Well, I was having this idea about writing this, and And I worked with Ilya a lot. We did a lot of co-teaching, and we did some projects also together. And then we just decided, well, let's contact Edison Wesley, and see if they want to work with us on the book. So we wrote the proposal. We got in touch with them, and after that we just made we made a starting chapter index and a chapter overview. But after the contract was signed, well, it completely changed multiple times, of course, and titles changed and everything changed. And so we would be writing a lot of using Google Docs, for example. Every few months we will get together, so we would have face-to-face time, doing co-writing. So but basically it was, well, I pick up this chapter and I write this chapter, and then Ilya came in and made comments, and vice versa. So that was maybe the first 2 years were like that, and then we thought we were almost done, and then it wasn't, of course, and then we had to do most of it again. Which was very nice. It was very fun. Learned a lot doing that.
So the book kind of took a similar trajectory to how a software project might.
Yes, overly ambitious, absolutely overly ambitious.
So you mentioned the title, right? And the subtitle on this book is A Systemic Approach.
Mm-hmm.
So can you explain a little bit more on that, Cesario, to our readers, and why not only you choose a subtitle, but why that's so important? Because that is the central thread that I found permeates the entire book. It's
Mm-hmm.
looking at things systemically as opposed to bits and bobs and pieces.
Yes, yeah, I think the systems perspective is key, and especially if you talk about scale. So if you have a couple of teams, then well, by default you probably look at the whole. But if you're in a big organization with 10,000 people, and I don't know, 500 teams, then bringing, let's say, agility to that scale, we believe is you require to look at not only the individual teams, but at the larger whole. And fortunately, we have, I don't know, 60 or 70 years of research on that, and we love that. We work with that a lot since many years, and that became the central theme of the book. And I think the key is that for the readers, for the listeners, I think, is to understand is if you want to improve this system, being it a product development group or a couple of departments developing some kind of service of a product or product, then it's probably insufficient to only focus on individuals or focus on the teams and improve the teams without realizing that each of the teams could be doing their best with all the best intentions, meeting their own whatever objectives they have. But unintentionally, all of them can actually be working against the larger goal without they realizing that. And by taking a step back and looking at how actions that these teams can take, actions that would negatively impact the performance of the whole, by taking a step back and understanding that and seeing that, then you can take responsibility for what you then discover. And once you do that, you can then you are then in a position to make fundamental solutions actually to improve the whole.
It's kind of like optimizing the whole as opposed to local optimizations. Is how that kind of occurs.
Yes.
As you're speaking, I'm noticing some thoughts and words that are very congruent with the body of knowledge in ORSC. I'm in the midst of the ORSC training now, so I'm just curious, is that something that's familiar to you, or you know anything about ORSC, or is it a good happy coincidence?
I think I'm not. I know that name. I don't know. I think it has something to do with a coaching certificate. If I'm correct, I don't know.
there is a coaching certificate, but it's as much looking at organizations and human systems and working on to affect change, influencing the entirety of the human system. And there's a thing called the third entity, which is the human system itself. So the similarities in the alignment between ORSC and what you and Ilya have written is really nice.
Okay. Oh, I'm not familiar with ORSC. Maybe I've seen it somewhere, but not at that detail that you are describing. No.
The first thing that jumped out at me as we dove into the book, right? So obviously you have a background in large scale Scrum. Mike and I both taken that course. I'm convinced it is one of, if not the best courses I've ever taken, based, I mean, the way it's taught. And we even talk about the way it's taught. First, let's talk about the gratuitous usage of causal loop diagrams, which Mike and I, truth be told, are working on the side to try and get good at.
We have a lot of those in the book also.
Oh, tons of them. But I love that because it forces you to think through when you say the whole idea of multiple backlogs, to your point about local optimization, where you have 5 or 10 teams with the best of intentions doing what they think is the best work, but systemically, it may actually be counterproductive. And those things visually, that was one of the things that tickled my brain. I was like, because it lays out in a logical pattern. Some of the things you think you're doing that are right may actually be incongruent with what you're trying to achieve.
Exactly. Yeah. So the CLD is one powerful technique. And the key is not the CLD. The key is that the people involved, let's say these teams involved that you just mentioned, that they become aware how their actions undermine the larger goal. So once they become aware of that, then they can take responsibility for that. Once you are in that situation, then good things could happen.
You're revealing the system to itself, to use
Right.
the worst term.
Yes. So that's key. That's the systemic part we think is super important. And in the book, just to finish up on your question, we built that up, and then we just make all decisions, all further detailing based on this whole. We first identify the whole. We call it a product group in this case, and then we only improve the parts, as Akov likes to say it, only if the whole is also improved simultaneously.
One of the bits early in the book that really resonated for me and caught my ear, this may have been one of the things I was spamming Jay with, was mentioning the second law of the fifth discipline. The harder you push, the harder the system pushes back. So to change the system, rather than attempting to coerce people to change behavior that's incongruent with a stable system, as you find it, rather look to change the system. And that connects with, again, to go back to my ORSC training, there's ground conditions for change. The first thing you have to have is you have to introduce new information into the system. So what was connecting for me is, the harder you push, the harder the system pushes back, because the system is not ready for change. And so that just really stood out to me. But the other thing that stood out is in a lot of the, I'll put it in the scare quotes, scaling ways of thinking, this is atypical. The typical approach is, we're going to tell you what to do, and we're going to, train everyone in launch trains, or whatever the saying of the month is. I'm curious, what led you to that kind of insight?
Okay, that's a very nice question. So I must admit that I tried also, let's say, the hard, the authoritative way. Like if senior management, like board, wants this, then things will start moving. But eventually, in my experience, it fires back. So, or you lead a large police force, to keep watching everybody and enforcing everybody, but then you're just pretty much where you started.
Right.
Just the police force just changed, I don't know, role names, but you still have the same command and control like behavior that you require. So I learned the hard way that even if you have the board support for this, if the people do not feel ownership for it, then it's very unlikely that you succeed. And even if you succeed in the first, let's say 6 to 8 to 12 months, if you come back a year later, which I did, much of the change is back, is reverted. Let's say has been undone. So actually, I learned that very hard by making these mistakes. We talk about a concept of volunteering. We truly believe this is essential if people if you want to really create a change, then it's much healthier if most of the people are truly feeling, well, I want to try this out. I want to try this out. I think it's worth the risk. And I'm volunteering to be part of this larger initiative. If not, if you do it by, let's say, authority or force, it probably doesn't work. At least in my experience, it didn't work.
Right, especially when especially when the CIO who's mandating the change reaches his expiration date and he moves on, and you get a brand new CIO with a brand new set of priorities and a brand new ways of thinking. One of the terms that you use early on in the book, which I'm pretty sure Mike and I owe you royalties for, Cesario, is the idea of copy and paste scaling and copy paste Scrum. Where and this is something you want to talk about learning the hard way. I think all three of us have learned that the hard way, where we walk in and it goes back to another big undercurrent in the book is the idea of organizational design, how you can't just paste Scrum patterns on top of an organization that is not structured in a way to make that conducive. It's the equivalent of walking into a room and telling everybody, I need you to write with your non-dominant hand. Going forward, that's all you can do. And trust me, it'll work. And that Mike and I have used that a lot. The idea of you can't just wallpaper, right? It's like having a hole in the wall and I just put wallpaper over it. Did I really solve the problem? No, because eventually whatever's behind that hole is going to seep through again. Mike and I got a lot of mileage out of that one. And the conversation around too often do we show up in a room and just try and we don't look at it systemically. We just try and wallpaper over the problems instead of fixing them.
Yes. Yeah. Copy paste scaling is, I wrote that paper in 2016 or something, or 2015, because it was just everywhere I came. And that has become, I think the reason is that people read the Scrum Guide. And the Scrum Guide, now it's a little bit different, but back then it was single team Scrum. But it has these roles and these artifacts. So if you want to scale it, well, you just, create one more, and then again, and then another one. And then, well, we're done. Not. Unless you have a lot of products, right? If you have 20 teams, 20 Scrum teams, you better have 20 products. By the way, did you notice that the word product is used over 100 times in the Scrum Guide?
No, I've never noticed that, but I've never looked.
Yeah, I did a word count a couple of years ago, and it was 150 times or something. And I realized, well, this is a pretty important word, but nobody really knows in our context what a product is.
Yes, and I'm so glad
all this copy paste problem.
You have a whole chapter on that. Mike will tell you I was having a nervous breakdown before the holidays because in my current role, we're having the conversation of do we have the right products? And to your point, everybody keeps it's here we go back to the Princess Bride. You keep using that word, but I don't think it means what you think it means. And nobody has a shared understanding of what is a product. And I love the way you describe it, where it needs to be broad enough. It needs to be something external that creates value with a customer, like those, and it's not told in a here's a tick the box way. You got to read it to get through it. So anybody who's listening, we're not even remotely doing the content justice. You really need to take a moment to read it. But there's a really wild chapter on working with product to understand, do you have even the right product structure? Because that will drive your organization, the OD parts of this book, and that drives everything else. And that was a wild minute to sit back and be like, oh, most of my bookmarks and notes and stuff,
That's
they're all
a lot.
in the product space, because the
Wow.
product space, I was writing a lot of that down, because again, everybody uses that word, and there is almost a semantic diffusion of it where not everybody thinks the same thing.
Mhm.
So there's a thread there I want to pull on for a second, Jay, if I can.
Yeah.
And this is particularly acute for me in the context of an engagement that I just wrapped up at the end of the year. Cesario, I'm curious, in your experience, when you go to work with an organization to help them define product, what a product is,
Mhm.
the definition that is in this book very similar to what you see in Les, and what we heard from Craig Larman, very wide product definition, and in many organizations that has a lot of implications. To Jay's point, the OD, organizational design implications, and just people's identities, and just it shifts a lot of things, and because those are shifts and change, there's bound to be objections and resistance. So in your experience, how do you approach that topic, and what have you seen as far as objections that come up, and how you can work with those objections? You can't just barrel over them, you have to work with them, I believe. And I'm curious if you could just share a bit about what you've seen in that.
Yes. So there, I can give maybe two examples. This depends on your starting situation. So let me give an example where there's a lot of copy-paste scaling going on, meaning one Scrum team per product part, as I call it.
Yeah.
So we have all these POs then. So this is a bank. There's 23 teams, one product, but they don't know that. But it's one product. And how do I know that? Because there is a director who is director product, that specific product, and it has a name as a banking product. I don't want to say it here, but let's say it's a lending product.
Right.
And so she's director that product, and she has 500 people working for her, you see, and 23 teams that make software of these 500 people, and they have 23 POs. So we're not talking about, this is let's call these POs a management role, and these are maybe board -4 level. Right? Okay. 3 board -3, board -4. So once the director was convinced that these 23 teams likely make up a product, her product, and she decided, well, we must treat it as one product, because if I want to focus on something which is most important, I want most of the teams to focus on that. I don't want just to be able to focus 2 teams while the other 21 teams work on something else which is of less importance. So I don't want that in the future. So I want to be able to focus all the teams, and that would imply that we would have much fewer POs. So a lot of these management roles would need to be eliminated, right? So how did we handle this? So this was a debate. The question was, in this particular example, should we eliminate the roles before, or should we leave the roles for now? Okay, in this example, we said, well, let's leave the rules for now. But we are going to take away the backlogs, because, well, guess what? We just have one backlog for moving on. So sorry, 22 backlogs are now gone. But you guys and ladies are still POs. Now, what happened, to make a long story short, after one sprint, so we did Scrum there, the POs voluntarily said, this is nonsense. Our role doesn't make any sense anymore. So we want to give up our role because we know that we are not POs anymore. So in this example, the POs just voluntarily gave up the role. And I call that, well, you are promoted to team member. Because now, you see, you can have lunch with the team and you can do your skill, which is business analysis. You know a lot about customer domains and journeys and customer journeys and so, and that's all super important. So we don't want that information to go. We still need you as before, but now you can just leave all that nonsense like coordinating teams or writing user stories. You can leave all that nonsense to the team, and you can use your intellect to do what you're really good at. So we call that a promoting. We promote these POs. Let's say team POs are promoted to team member, and in this case, they came to that conclusion themselves.
Sounds like an organization with a strong culture of safety and employment security as opposed to role security.
Yes. Yeah, yes, and it was a bank. So, and yes, so this is true. Yes, and I have other examples. This is another company in the financial sector, where, well, you know, this role, the position of the people was there was, well, this role is tied to my status. This is what I put on LinkedIn.
Yeah.
So there's no way that I want to give up this role title. You know, I want to be something else, senior, or, you know, I want to be more broader POs. I want to be the real PO, but, you know, you're not taking away this title because this means something to me. So one way, one way we handled this in this situation was that we said, well, okay, you know, we don't really care what the role is that you use in LinkedIn. You can put any role you want, actually, as long as it's not too radical. And if you want to be called a PO here, still true, you can still be called a PO here. But there's now this new gentleman. In this case, it was a gentleman, and he's chief PO, right? He was actually a board -1, and he just calls the shots from now on priority. So this was a 7-team configuration, and it was done like that. So this role was still in existence, but again, we reduced the number of product backlogs. So this is two. Yes, I can tell you more, but these are two examples of last year actually, and yeah,
it made a lot of sense. And when we reached that point in the book, Mike and I were going back and forth with each other, like, hey, they're actually suggesting we make the product owner a team member and not have that whole delineation, and that's not something we've ever seen before, but it makes, to your point, when you explain it like that, Cesario, it makes a lot of sense. Like, why would you keep a named role? And you're right, there is some personal feeling and attachment that goes with title and those sort of things. And we understand that. We're not trying to poo-poo that or downplay that at all, but it really comes down to, in service of the system, what is the best use of my skill? And if it's me being a team member who brings my analysis and business, my subject matter expertise into the team, well, that's the best use for it. And I think taking us full circle back to earlier in the conversation, the argument for even that move is most of us can't even define what a product is. So why do we have so many product owners if we're defining things that really aren't products? They're components of a product, or they're an experience inside a stakeholder product, right? I hate to bring it back to Wittgenstein and all, you know, it's all words. Our problems are all words, but I do think that's a large part of it.
Yes. And so an interesting observation, a thread through those two examples that really stands out for me in a positive way is the approach that you described wasn't coming hitting him over the head saying, you're no longer a product owner, get out. Because that then, you know, somebody feels like their status or their whoopee, their security blankets getting taken away, but rather just the effective power, the decision making was moved, and then
Yes.
let those people come to it kind of on their own. So it's letting them get to that realization without whacking them over the head with a perceived loss.
Yeah, that's a good one, Mike. I just want to add one little sentence to that, and that is, if you put your facilitation or consulting hat, and you have conversations with these people, in most of these situations, they don't have the power. They have the illusion that they have the power to order their backlog, but it's not true. So in these conversations, you can help by making that more clearer, right? That's,
Yeah.
you see, there is a backlog somewhere. It's not called a backlog. It's a thing, but
Right.
it's there, and there's a person or two who make the real calls.
Yeah.
Right,
Don't have the illusion, if you work on a product part, that you actually are making the calls.
The real backlog. I like how you
Yeah.
said that, because it is true. It is
Yeah.
somewhere. It's typically a SharePoint in someone's local drive, but there is a one backlog to rule them all, which is truly where the decisions get made.
Yeah.
To pivot this conversation a bit, sorry, I want to ask you about mindset. So you talk a little bit about mindset in the book, and there's an interesting paradox there. And Mike actually called this out to me, where some people will say that following the process creates your mindset. And others will say, well, your mindset influences your process, which is similar to more the culture follows structure. What are your thoughts? Is there one where, based upon it sounds like you've taken some war wounds, right? Based upon some of the war wounds you suffer, which is the smart way we should be looking at this as coaches, as practitioners, as people trying to help these orgs really be successful?
Wow, I think there are multiple levels to it. I think if you look at the org from the org design perspective, then from my experiences that if you want to create certain type of behavior, then it's stronger. The stronger effect is created by having the right structure, for example, the right responsibility divisions, the right processes, the right tools. That will greatly influence. That will win over mindset. So if you just to give a concrete example for the readers or the listeners, if the structure demands that you keep working with these 10 product owners and these 10 separate teams, then they can be very agile and be very, the mindset could be very, well, let's do the best for the whole. But if they are not measured on that and the processes just work against that, then it will be very hard for them to optimize the whole.
So it
Of
reminds
course.
me of a bad system will beat a good person every time.
Yes, maybe that's a nice wording. And some readers might think, well, but eventually in our company, it broke and it became good because we had lots of people who had this right mindset, and then finally the mindset won. And I say, yeah, that's true also. But after that period, maybe it was 6, 7, 8 years, then some senior manager came to the conclusion that he needed to change the org design. You see, that's
So what you're saying is pick your battle, and how important is short-term success? Like back to, you can't just wallpaper this over your current structure. Your current structure is not set up to deal with maximizing flow efficiency and getting the value out the door at the most expeditious way possible, minimizing handoffs and dependencies. So if you're going to paste one on top of the other, it literally is the example of the square peg in the round hole, where you can spend a month of some days tapping it, and maybe eventually you'll get that square peg in there. But realistically, you should look for the right size, right shape peg.
Yeah. So let me just give more example about org design. Maybe that's a bit more specific. So there's this organization, and they say, well, we have these teams, and we cannot get them to take ownership for end-to-end integration. It just doesn't work. No, the teams are very, we have a hard time for them to feel ownership for that. And then we had a look and more talks and investigations and so on. And we came to the conclusion that they had this role, and this was called the chain integrator role. So when you have multiple components, then they call it, in Holland at least, they call it a chain. And then there's a role who integrates across the chain. Yeah, and I said, oh, what does this person do? Well, he's responsible for chain integration. Yeah, but okay, but well, you can feel it, right? So you can, the teams can have lots of can have a good mindset, but you know, the responsibility is taken away from them and given to this specific role, which was not one person, was a set of teams, and they have the skills, they have the authorities to access the systems, and so forth and so on. So you can have all the mindset you want. This will very likely not change if you do not redesign, in this case, this chain integration role, or this chain test role. So that's one level of it. On the other level, I'd say, if you go down and talk about the team level regarding your question, then I think mindset is key. So once you're in the team, and this is the team, if we want an agile team, there's mindset is the dominant influencer.
So it depends on your level of abstraction. At the higher level, you really want to concentrate more on org design and make it work, as in processes and practices in light of mindset. Whereas when you get truly into the teams, mindset is key.
Their mindset is dominant. Yeah.
Yeah. That kind of connects with the way that I've internalized this. Is that each is necessary but not sufficient. You can't, one without the other doesn't work. You know, yeah, I'm sure you've had the experience where restructure the organization and give people new badges and new titles, but the effect, the incentives in the organization haven't changed. So accordingly, the behavior hasn't changed. So the change in incentives is a reflection of what the organization values, which is a reflection of the Dave Snowden's, gonna read me out for saying this, but of the mindset, it really gets down to what is the organization value.
Yes,
I think so. It seems like a paradox, but it's really, I think you put it well, is that you need them both. But they're applied in different ways. Is kind of, and in different times.
Yes, I think I like what you're saying a lot. I just want to add one just for the readers to be sure that we communicate this clearly. So when we talk about OD, so organizational design, we don't mean only structure. So structure is just a part of it. It also is about career paths, right? What kind of people do we want? How do we value them? What are the processes and policies and so on around that? So structuring, so having these teams is just a part of it. If you only have the teams, but leave the processes and the career paths and so on all at the same level in the KPIs, let's say, then unlikely that it will work. But org design means all of that.
And what I've seen be the most impactful is the incentives, how people are evaluated and rewarded, and put into very plain language. What does their boss ask them about, and who is their boss? So when your boss is the chief product owner is going to be asking you about, hey, how are we doing with our customers? If your boss is the head of quality assurance, you're going to be asked about how many defects did you find, and regardless of what relationship that has to a good customer experience. So
absolutely.
It all kind of fits in together.
The OD is way more than just the pyramid. Just the pyramid. One of the, and I know we're quickly coming up on time, Cesario, but one of the things I want to ask you about is there was a chunk of the book where Mike wrote this down, and it made me laugh, where you talk about how team success, and what does team success come down to? And there's a call out that 90% of the team's success, 60% is team design, 30% is team launch, 10% is due to the quality and level of team coaching. And Mike put that in the agenda and he highlighted it and sent it to me and said, man, we're not as important as we think we are we? But let's talk about that for a bit, because that I'm sure rattles some trees for some people, but I think that statement is one of those things where a lot of us intrinsically know, but we don't ever talk about it in common in mixed company, because it's one of those things that we know just by observation. Can we talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah. Yes. So this comes from Richard Heckman. So there are some interesting papers and a book also from him, where he actually has empirical evidence where it follows that. He highlights it in many ways. One way also interesting is he asks the question: if you have a high-performing team and a high-performing leader, manager, coach, what was there first? You see, was there first the high-performing team? Was there first the high-performing manager? And it contrary to belief. Good management comes from a good team and not vice versa. You see. So, and this is as you say, maybe if you work in this sector, it's pretty obvious, but that's where this came from, and that's what we also experience. So if the team is having success, then you as a coach will have success. But if you have success as a coach, meaning you do your job really well, or I don't know, you facilitate your things really well, and you make things really clear, and you facilitate conflict really well, whatever it is that you do, then you could feel very, 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 very good about yourself and think you have a lot of impact. But we believe, and research and our experience confirms that if you are very good in facilitating conflict, then it's probably also for a major part has to do with the liftoff that the team had and the skills that they already had developed before you did the conflict coaching, for example. So liftoffs and creating this let's call it this solid base for a team is very important for a coach to be successful later on when you come into the equation.
That's a common theme. When I was learning how to fly little airplanes, one of the things I learned through experience is that a poor approach makes for a poor landing, but a smooth
poor approach. Yeah, I like
that. So there was one other thing that I was just, when I read this, I was kind of mind blown in that I was like, wow, I never thought of this, but it is so true. I really love for you to share a bit about it with our listeners, and that is the 3 types of dependencies. And there's one particular type that is like really bad, and there's some metrics about it. Wonder if you could maybe talk about that just a little bit.
Okay, I think you mean the task dependencies, right?
Yeah. Pooled interdependencies, sequential interdependence, and reciprocal interdependence.
Reciprocal, yes. Yeah, so this is in the org design aspect, and just like if you develop software, there are all these dependencies, and one approach, of course, is to manage the dependencies. But as looking at the system as a whole, what about eliminating dependencies in the first place so they don't need to be managed? And if you look at tasks, that is work that the teams need to execute, and you look at dependencies between those, then especially in software, it turns out that if just for the readers, if there is functionality that you need to make a feature, and the feature cuts across, let's say 8 teams most of the time. So meaning, let's say you have 10 features to do, and 8 of these features, if you want to do them, all these teams need to do something for it. So it cuts across all the teams. If you have that, then you could say that there is a dependency between these teams, because each of these teams need to do something in order to put that feature into the hands of an end user. Now, this is not a bad thing per se. So you can investigate what type of dependency that is. Now, if it is a reciprocal dependency, that means that if I have 2 teams, let's say, and team A does something, like they write a piece of code, this influences team B. So they need to react to that because I need to make another API call or whatever they need to do. But once they do that, this will influence again team A. So we have this loop between teams. That's a reciprocal dependency. And it turns out from academics that these are the most costly to coordinate if they are in separate formal units, as the academics call it. So in our language, it's just if they are in different teams, it's worse. If these teams are in different departments, it gets worse, and so forth and so on. And if you want to lower the cost of coordination, which has to do with, in software, with late integration and working on out of sync and all that stuff that we're not going into. But if you want to reduce the coordination cost, then the best thing to do is to contain them within the same formal unit. So you put them in one team. Well, what if a team is too big? Well, you put them in the same product group, under the same management, chasing the same goals, working off the same product backlog, and so on. So that's reciprocal dependency. Now, there are also sequential dependencies, which are dependencies that, you know, if team A does something, then we can talk about it maybe once or twice. We can write something down, and then we hand it off to team B, and they can pretty much, let's say, most of the time just do it without any feedback required. So that's a sequential dependency. So those hurt less. Those are less costly, right?
Right.
So if you have to make a choice, let's say, well, our group is becoming too big, or our product group is containing too much technology, well, the teams just cannot handle this, or the customer domain is becoming so broad, the whole world is our customer, then you want to contain reciprocal first and sequential later, right? But if you have intellectual capacity, there's enough. Well, just add sequential also, of course. But if you have to make a choice, then reciprocal first, sequential second, and pooled third. Pooled is a dependency at this level, not at the organization level, but at the team level. Pooled dependency is a shared resource, maybe a testing system. If you work at a company that makes hardware, expensive hardware, maybe a testing system costs 10 million. You probably don't have 100 of those. Maybe you have 5. So you need to reserve them and so on, with an agenda and so on. So these type, it's not reciprocal, but it's a dependency you can easily manage with traditional project management techniques. Be it could also be an expert, a person. So we can just schedule his time in our agenda. We need him in 3 months or in 3 weeks, and we need him for a couple of days. And it's not reciprocal. So with good preparation, it turns out well most of the time. So those are the 3 dependencies, and these are at the task level.
Yeah, that very clear-eyed perspective of dependencies and identifying which ones have the most coordination cost, I think is worth the price of the book and then some.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. I do want to point out another important dependency, which is not on task level, but it's on unit level. So if you have different units, let's say departments or it also works on teams, but let's say departments. And so these groups can be coupled or coupled, let's in better English, I think, not on tasks, but they can be coupled on the thing that they do in the organization. We call it the function that they have, that they need to perform. If there's a coupling between these functions, then chances are high that they will have a dependency in which attempts that Department A does to achieve its goal will negatively affect the ability of Department B to achieve their goals. So once you have that, this is not at a task level, this is at a larger unit level. Those need to be resolved too before task dependencies become
Right.
most impactful. Those are more impactful than the task dependencies.
Yeah.
And I have definitely worked at places where those things were kind of kept as in the back pocket, ace in the hole. And the result that we're not going well, we could just torpedo somebody else's, which is not a good political place to be. Well, Cesario, we're quickly approaching time. I know it's late for you. I want to thank you for coming on. For those listeners, we barely even scratched the surface of this book. I would be remiss though if I didn't shout out at the end of every chapter. There's a list of references. I am a very harsh judge of Agile books, where if I don't come away with at least 3 to 4 new things that I didn't know I should read, it wasn't a good book. This, I have a laundry list. The first chapter alone, I think I came away with 4 or 5 different books to read, which is a great sign. So if you're listening, please check out the book. It is definitely, it's worth the time and then some. So Cesario, as we wrap up, if listeners want to get a copy of the book, they want to learn more about you, they maybe want to get in touch, where do they go? Where do they look?
Oh, great. So we have this website called creatingagileorganizations.com. We are putting papers there, blogs. We have a course agenda there. We offer a designing agile organizations course and a creating agile organizations course if you want to get into that kind of stuff. And we have discount numbers available, coupons, I think they are called. So maybe if they can contact you or contact me, I don't know if I'm saying, if you want them to contact you, I have some to give away so that they can find the book at a discount. Yeah, that's
maybe join our Discord and get a discount code.
Yeah.
For example, I can send it to you or to Mike, and then you can just give it away as a gift or something.
Perfect. And Cesario, for people who want to contact you, where do they go?
Oh, they can go to creatingagileorganizations.com, or they can just contact me on LinkedIn, on Cesario Ramos, or use my email if they want, which is cesario@agilix, which is agilix.nl.
Perfect. So once again, Cesario, I want to thank you so much for taking the time to chat with us. On behalf of Mike, Cesario, and myself, I want to thank all of you listeners for tuning in once again. Like Mike said, hop in on the Discord. We have a lot of conversation going on there about this book and many other things. You might make some connections and learn something. Shout out to Machine Man Records and Krebs for giving us our outro music royalty free. We have a Patreon to offset production and hosting costs. We're committed to being free, but if you want to throw some bucks, maybe you'll get a pair of socks and some stickers in the mail. So once again, I want to thank Cesario for joining us. And until next time, this is the Agile Uprising Podcast signing out.
Thanks a lot. It was great. I really enjoyed our conversation.